So I'm delighted to. So if you have any questions, there's going to be time at the end for questions. So feel free to pop them in the chat or just remember them, and you can say them at the end if you raise your hand. So we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So now I'm delighted to hand over to our first speaker, Richard from Channel Rescue.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for inviting us along here. I don't know how many people here have heard of Channel Rescue or the work we're doing on the South Coast. So I'll start from scratch really. We're a human rights monitoring organisation that was set up in response to the overt securitization and militarization of the border and effectively the culture war that has arisen over people crossing the channel in dinghies, which has become a phenomenon, wasn't unheard of before, but has really become a phenomenon in the last 3 years, has undergone a number of changes in those 3 years. But what we're seeing now as a result of the huge amount of money that's been spent. Oh, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, the huge amount of money that's been spent on behest of the British government in France to fortify the motorway network going in to Calais, which was the principal point of transit into the UK, was people getting on lorries. Now that's become increasingly difficult. So what we saw 3 years ago was a move towards people actually actively crossing the channel itself in boats. And this was met initially with, what we saw was beach landings. So people were actually making it all the way across the channel. People were launching in Calais. They were launching at Calais in the early hours of the morning and being pointed at the lights of Dover, making it that way, which is an 8 or 9 hour crossing. Sometimes people were doing that in boats that they'd purchased, boats that had been stolen from marinas around Europe. There was a certain amount of organised activity around that. Sometimes we were seeing people who literally walked into the equivalent of Decathlon or Sports Direct in Calais and had bought themselves the kind of dinghy that you would go on holiday with, that you might buy on holiday rather, and then paddle across. And that's what we were seeing. So we've set up, because the far right along the Kent coast had mobilised themselves to start trying to greet the beach landings. And we felt it was important that there was some kind of left-wing response to this, effective solidarity with those making this extraordinarily dangerous. And I think it's important to say unnecessary crossing. One thing about Channel Rescue is it's evolved. We've never lost sight of the goal that what we really want is safe passage. We don't want this to be, but people should be able to, at the very least, claim asylum in northern France. And we're saying that over and over again. There is no reason why anybody has to risk this journey across the busiest shipping lane in the world to get to these shores and effectively be processed there. There is no reason why this couldn't be done in Calais. So that's how we started out. We've evolved. We could see this three-step dance evolving really between the street far right or the beach far right, Tommy Robinson, the kind of vigilantes like Steve Laws, people like that, the suited far right, Nigel Farage, who was making regular appearances on the Kent coast at that point, whipping up a storm about a migrant invasion, and then the Home Office. So we would see this process whereby actually very similar numbers, if not declining numbers, to the people who had crossed in other ways were transformed in the tabloid press into a tidal wave and a seaborne invasion. And we felt it was time to get in there, monitor what was going on, and actually try and drag that over to a window a bit leftwards, and encourage the number of people we know that are interested in refugee solidarity into being active and making it visible. So what we've done to that end is we maintain regular monitoring of what Border Force and the various assets the UK government have put into the channel are doing. So we monitor them via marine radio, we monitor the positions of the various Border Force craft, and what they're up to. We talk to the RNLI and so on and so forth. We actually have shore patrols, so we have people out on the cliffs spotting with binoculars or telescopes, monitoring the situation there, and ultimately we have boat patrols. So we get out and try and see what's actually going on in the channel to keep an eye on that situation. As a result of one of our shore observations, we saw, and this I think is perhaps going to be the story of this summer, we saw Border Force practicing with jet skis. They seem to be trying to practice pushbacks. Now, the pushbacks have potentially been legalized in the new Nationality and Borders Bill when that goes through. We are, as a result of what we saw, we are taking Priti Patel to court to seek a judicial review of the legality of the concept of pushbacks in international maritime law. Because while pushbacks are a regular feature of what's going on in the situation in the Mediterranean, they're not actually legalized there, they're just practiced. So the UK is one of the first countries to seek to try and legalize this process. We haven't got a clue how it's going to work. It seems that and it might be that Care for Calais, who I think are talking later, might talk about this, because they've teamed up in a parallel court case with the PCS, the union representing Border Force, to also take Priti Patel to court and seek a judicial review of how this practice can work and how it can be legal. So anyway, that's going on. We've got a hearing coming up in May. That's before perhaps hopefully we're going to get a decision on this, whether it's legal or illegal, prior to the main season happening, because what we do know is that people will really start crossing in numbers once the weather gets better. And I don't know where to leave it there. I'm hoping this will come up in the questions as to what we're doing. It's a huge topic. It's only one sort of tiny fragment of what's going on with the refugee situation. And it obviously ties in with what's going on in Calais. It ties in with what's going on in domestic politics here. I'd urge everyone to look at our website, look at our Twitter, follow what we're doing. And if you've got any questions or you'd like to get involved, then please let me know.
Thanks so much, Richard. It was really interesting. It is Richard, isn't it? Because your name's changed to Simon. Yeah.
Man of mystery, yes, yeah.
No, thank you so much for speaking. It's really good to know that there's people like you monitoring what's going on, and whilst the country isn't that big, sometimes Sheffield and Dover can actually feel quite far away. So it's really helpful to know about what's going on. So thank you very much, and there'll be time for questions at the end. We'll now move on to our next speaker, Maham. So Maham has worked in Italy with people who have crossed the Mediterranean and has a wealth of experience to tell us about. So I'd like to hand over to Maham now, if she's there.
Yep. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so I was going to start with, I don't often do public events. And to be honest, talking about migration in the EU, I feel like a broken record. So I've been working on this route for, I don't know, like since the 90s, I guess. And not much has changed. Although obviously there are things that are kind of newer, let's say like 10, 15 years old in Europe, but not like massively. We haven't seen really big shifts in policy in the last few years or anything like that, even including the Migration Pact in 2020. Yeah, so another reason why I'm also not comfortable speaking about migration that much sometimes is because in the last few years I've been working with the humanitarian aid organization, and I am starting to question this the approach to a political crisis through humanitarian aid every day. So yeah, so the Central Mediterranean route is still the most deadly migration route in the world, with over 100 people drowning in the Mediterranean just last week alone. The reason why people embark on this perilous journey is a story of politics, right? It has a few kind of sides. The first being Europe wants an underclass of exploited workers in their farming and logistic industries. And the second is that Europe wants to maintain and support its arms industry as well as its neoliberal ambitions in the global south. So what they've come up with is a clever system where they bomb and starve people out of their home countries, pushing them to the external borders of the EU, where they're kept in what are basically open air prisons. Some cases they are prisons, some cases they're torture camps, some cases it's a whole country being an open prison with borders securitized on each end. And basically people are then let out of these areas in dribs and drabs so that they can control the flow of immigration, right? So it's like, this is what all migration management is about. I'm not necessarily implying that, you know, a group of people sat down and were like, okay, we're going to make this system. That's not what I'm saying. Though the group of people that should have seen that there is a system in place and like try to change politics and policies to make it so that, you know, we could undermine some of these currents have definitely not done that part. So the way the central Mediterranean route can be mapped out, and like this is something that anyone can do with a cursory glance at like EU funding of the International Organization for Migration or other such organizations, is there's one line of externalization, which is the northern borders of sub-Saharan Africa, so the southern borders of the Saharan Desert, I guess. And then the next one is the Mediterranean itself. And then, so what you have is basically, yeah, so this people who are blocked through fences, putting in camps in countries like Niger, countries like Senegal are part of this, you know, like where a lot of EU funding is going to like externalize its borders. And so, but once they pass through that, they come into like this big kind of region, which is kind of the Sahara Desert and kind of ends up in the north in Libya, where you have the torture camps that are well documented by various human rights organizations. Then you have the Mediterranean Sea itself, which is one of the most, as I said, the deadliest migration route that has been monitored. And then you get into Europe, whether it's Italy, Greece, Spain, whatever, wherever you kind of end up landing. And there you have a new set of purgatory systems, right? Where the only way to legalize your entry into Europe is through the asylum laws, which are inherently warped in a weird sense of like, you can only get asylum if your country is being bombed, and then sometimes not even then, because, you know, apparently Afghanistan is a safe country to deport people to and from. So yeah, Syria is also now not a problem area, so people can be deported back there as well. So as I said, it's a political conundrum that has been built by legal systems in the EU. Yeah, so I think I'm going to leave it at that so that there's more space for like conversations. But yeah, those are kind of the main points on like the central Mediterranean route.
Thank you so much, Maham, for speaking. And I can tell by the way you speak how much you care about this issue, and I really appreciate you giving up your time to speak to us about something that you find difficult to talk about. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to hearing the questions that you get asked at the end. Our next speaker is Simon, who's worked with refugees in a different part of Europe, so more so along the Balkan route. So we'll get a different perspective. So thank you, Simon.
Yeah, nice to meet everyone. Yeah, so I'm going to speak a little bit about the Balkan route, and I've actually been working together with Maham and other people in some organisations and collectives there kind of looking mostly at illegal pushbacks from borders, touching on what Richard said. So the kind of rise in these illegal deportations happening mostly along the land borders, the Balkan route, and how the EU has been kind of over time externalizing its borders into non-member states, and particularly the ex-Yugoslav countries in the Central Balkans. And yeah, over the last few years, I've been part of this network called Border Violence Monitoring Network. So it's been like a counter mapping project, which we try to take like testimony from people and to create some like political pressure on the issue, particularly of pushbacks, but also other types of violence that are going on, as the others mentioned, in camps, through the asylum system, and whatnot. So I'm gonna share my screen because I'm gonna show a couple of maps just to maybe like put this in context of where we're talking about and how this route kind of developed. So yeah, this is a very broad map, if people can see that, of European migration routes. And I mean, it's worth saying that maps in general kind of miss the point of migration, in that these are all examples of how states and journalists and NGOs imagine borders to function. They're more representative of like how states configure violence as much as like how we can interpret a lived experience of a route. But you know, maybe it's interesting to go through some of them, and I'm going to show some of the ones from different organizations to see how pushbacks are happening, and also how EU externalization is happening. So yeah, the Balkan route is defined in many different ways. Obviously, it connects all the way up to Sheffield, all the way across Europe. I mean, it's not one fixed endpoint and starting point, but you know, the Balkan Peninsula is the main part of it, where people are coming through Turkey, Greece, and up towards the EU external border, which is Croatia and Hungary are main entry points, but also Romania. And it's been a point of movement for obviously like thousands of years, but it became popularized in 2015 with this humanitarian corridor. And I put that in like inverted commas, like as Maham was saying, because of the flawed or kind of violence of humanitarianism. Like 2015 was when this official corridor of movement, people could get on trains which would like take them through North Macedonia, Serbia, up into Hungary, and kind of enter them into the EU asylum system, which was a response to like people displaced by the war in Syria. But in fact, actually, this was like a kind of learning process for the EU in terms of the confinement and containment of people. So a lot of the camps along the external border, where they were first set up as reception centres, started to develop closed detention spaces inside them. Throughout the course of 2015-16, the EU started to separate refugees by nationality, gender, age, vulnerability. We started to see, I mean, asylum systems were already inherently violent and tied to the kind of racialized conceptions of like visa regimes and borders already, but the humanitarian response from 2015 onwards became ever more closely tied to the, as Maham said, this kind of manipulation of people's movement. And in 2016, this corridor, this official corridor of movement along the train routes, which went into Hungary and then Croatia, officially finished. And most people were told, okay, the Balkan route itself has closed. But we know that's not really true. I mean, movement is always going on through these borders, despite the kind of narratives or the way that maps might represent closure or whatnot. This is one that kind of represents the borders closures as they were, these red lines being the parts of the external border of the EU that people are crossing. And as Maham mentioned, this idea of like certain countries themselves becoming open air prisons, particularly Bosnia and Serbia, so non-EU member states where people can't enter the EU asylum system. These countries have had really extensive EU funding pumped into them, especially proxies like IOM, International Organization for Migration, UNHCR, but also filtering down to the lower level of NGOs kind of working to enact state violence and hold people in camps in poor conditions. And so like the Balkan route is not necessarily one route, but it's many routes of people trying to get out and navigate their way out of that, particularly recently through Serbia into Romania. And also, you know, moving through Bulgaria, Albania is an emergent route as well, that people are leaving Greece and coming through the more western side of the Balkans because of the fences that are built on the border with Macedonia. And like underwriting all this kind of bordering is like pushback. So that's mostly what our organization was documenting. So we were taking interviews with people who are getting removed at night, mostly across the border, by police who are beating them up, stealing their belongings and not giving them access to the asylum system. And I mean, as was mentioned, this is not necessarily a system of closing a border because the border isn't really closed, but it's a filtering system that is kind of racialized to prevent people from accessing the asylum kind of then maybe we'll be able to get into the EU eventually, which most people do, but not having a proper right to remain, working, you know, in poor conditions, and then being at risk of eventual deportation. And this is one map which shows lots of points where these pushbacks are happening. But I mean, as Richard mentioned, it's like it's such a norm now, even though it's obviously illegal under Geneva Convention and many EU law as well, many forms of international law, kind of to some extent is the policy in terms of borders. And a big part of that is Frontex. I mean, both physically in terms of the resources they throw towards detection. So they're usually using kind of drones, surveillance planes, and different types of thermal kind of detection equipment. Particularly in the Western Balkans, this is like going on in Albania and Serbia and other countries where new missions of Frontex officers have been sent there. And this is a kind of first actually in Frontex history where these deployments aren't working with the national police, but they have like an independent mandate and are immune from the courts in those countries. So they're effectively operating with complete immunity, armed divisions of officers who are carrying out pushbacks. That's also happening, you know, off the coast of Senegal, on various points of the EU external border where we're seeing Frontex's mandate massively exploding, which is why I think it's also like important. Maybe people have heard of it, these recent campaigns to abolish Frontex, like some police abolitionist movements, which are like trying to critically address Frontex. That's something maybe people can key into or watch out for. But yeah, as this map shows, like those green countries of the ex-Yugoslav states, Montenegro is shown there in grey, are also being like excessively targeted by the EU, who are using conditionality. So the fact that these countries are trying to join, the EU is leveraging that against them. So forcing them to use the pre-accession funds, so the funding they get as a candidate state, to invest in fingerprinting technology, to take on the acquis communautaire, which is like the laws from the EU, specifically in asylum, to set up camps within their territory to warehouse people. So it's heavily politically and tied up to EU expansion as well. And as you see here, also, this is a bit of an old map that shows some of the border fences that are there that are also partially being funded by the EU and have grown since then. And as I said, I mentioned camps. This is a map of Bosnia and the camps there, which I think, like alongside detention centres, it's also really important that we start to address like the carceral nature of camps and how these sites and the role of NGOs and international NGOs in kind of warehousing and containing people in spaces is really crucial. Even during the COVID period, a lot of these places, we had fences built around them, and also the military in Serbia, for instance, they were using the military to shut people inside those camps. So I think like the case of Greece as well, where they've got heavily surveyed camps and building walls around the outside them, just shows that camps are not a solution at all to movement. And in fact, they're part of the problem and part of the border. So yeah, I'll leave it for there because that's probably a bit too long already, and maybe you can just pick it up in questions as well.
Thank you, Simon, for the detailed summary there. It was really interesting to see the different routes. I like the use of the visual aids, and I'm looking forward to hearing the questions that you get asked. So now we'll move on to our final speaker, Sarah, for Care for Calais. Sarah's worked extensively in Calais and has only recently got back from Calais, so we'll be able to hear what's happening there right now. So over to you, Sarah.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I've just come back from Calais. I've been there for a month. We came back on Sunday. The situation in Calais has just deteriorated like we would expect. There's a big food ban. I don't know if you know, but it's a big food ban going on in Calais at the moment. So it means that there's an awful lot of sites that we're not actually able to distribute food to. There's a lot of places in Calais whereby now they're being moved on all the time. So trying to find somewhere safe to be able to distribute food, and food that they can cook for themselves, because a lot of the areas, they're not able to actually have food deliveries done by charities that would normally deliver food. So a lot of our aim at the moment is not just providing non-food items, which is tents, clothing, general care. It's actually now giving them enough food and water just to get through the day. As we've seen with the situation with Ukraine at the minute, we have a lot of refugees in Calais literally coming through thinking that they can just go through to the UK, get to the border, get to the port and get told they need a visa. The difference for the Ukrainian refugees at the minute is that actually they can claim a visa by being in northern France. And the process, although not simple, nothing is simple, it's possible, it's happening. And in the interim, they're well looked after whilst they're waiting for their visa so they can safely cross and get to the UK, which is hopefully a temporary solution for them. Nobody wants a war, I know. The biggest problem we have is that this actually shows how simple this process can be, that actually no one needs to keep losing their lives taking these journeys. It's not just to see. I mean, even trying to jump on a lorry or hide away, these have massive ramifications for the people that are doing it. At the minute, there's a young lad who's 16 in hospital, probably going to lose at least one of his legs, because he tried to make this journey and it didn't go well for him. And these are very young people. We're not, you know, we're talking of all age people, and all they want is a chance that other people are able to get. I know there's complications whenever you try to sit there and claim asylum from one country to another and you're not in that country. But the process has just been shown that it's very possible. It's been shown that you could just take someone's name, get some basic details, go to UK safely, and then have your biometrics done, investigate further, and in the interim, you're treated like a human being. We at Care for Calais at the minute are seeing so much hostility, desperation. Obviously, people want to go to the UK. That's why most people are in Calais. They've had no safe legal way to do this, which means that they are also struggling with their journeys they've made so far. Calais is not the last resort. Calais is still a journey to go. They've been through how to get where they are. They could be there for 2 days, it could be there for 2-3 years. And in the interim of all of this, we have a food ban in Calais, whereby we cannot just go to ordinary sites and just give tea, coffee, some food. So we have to make up food packs. These are extremely expensive because we're finding more and more people are coming over, because again, the only options for them is to try and go by boat or to sit there and try and hide in a lorry. So the situation is extremely difficult. There are other people doing food distributions, but not as often. COVID had a lot to do with this. Financing has a lot to do with this, which means that actually now we're one of the few charities that are trying to deal with this plus everything else. I think I'm more frustrated in the fact that it's like I just said, and I know I keep repeating it, but it's just been shown how easy this could be, how simple this could be. We could stop people dying. We could stop people from having these horrendous journeys, being treated like third-rate citizens when they're in northern France. It's not like when they arrive, they're housed. They're not even given basics. They don't get access necessary to food, to showers, toilets, all the basics that we would take, never mind a roof over their heads. They're tents, such as they are. I mean, it was snowing last weekend. It actually snowed for 2 days last week, and it's freezing. It's cold, it's wet. There was emergency shelter, which also proves, again, that the state can do this. You don't have to just do it when it's cold and horrible. You could do this all the time, but it doesn't happen. And we have to pick up the pieces. And I just feel that as a charity, how much more a charity is supposed to do when the options are it's all there. It's also obvious. You can just keep people safe. We could just give them a roof over their head, have their asylum claims heard in northern France, stop spending billions to keep walls up and people out. We could put that into infrastructure to welcome people, keep them safe, and give them the chance. I mean, that's all they're asking, a chance to start their lives. They're not asking for much. It makes me very cross when you hear people talk about the benefit system. Most people I've met don't even know what that system is. You know, where they've come from. If you don't earn any money, you just don't eat. There's no such thing as state dependent. You just don't have these issues. They just want to come, they want to be safe, they want to be heard. We have to be their voice. And in the interim, we are their voice, because it seems so many people just don't want them to be heard. And it's just much easier to push the problem to another country, to another state, to basically the UK seems to just prefer to pay to rid themselves of an issue that isn't actually that much of an issue. We're not talking hordes of people. We're talking, as we all know, the percentage of people trying to get to the UK, especially once they've come through France, is less than 3%. It's nothing. And they're not huge masses of people on the boats either. It's laughable. It's people being scared of families arriving on a boat. It says a lot about us. But what we're doing right now in Calais, what we desperately need help with, to be honest, apart from volunteers as always, and obviously getting the word out that the situation is still here. There's not a lot of meat unless something awful happens. The media has forgotten Calais, Dunkirk, everything that's going on just across the border. And it's just so close. We can focus on the Ukraine because it feels more close to home. But actually what's happening right now is literally close to home. And we could do something to prevent all this, and we're not. I feel that what we need right now is more help, more support to sit there and maintain just the basics. We are literally giving food packs it's a 4-person food pack. We do it once a week across 3 or 4 different sites, but we've gone up from doing 200 a week to nearly 500 a week. These are costing us over £12–13 a pack. Sourcing it's hard, paying for it's continually difficult, and this is just a start. It's only April, so we've nearly doubled in less than 6–7 weeks. It only goes to logic that in the next couple of months, more people are going to arrive, more people are going to make that horrible, horrible decision that the best thing they can do is to try and get on a boat and cross the sea, which we all know is just so dangerous and so avoidable. So yeah, at Care for Calais at the minute, we are doing everything we can, but we need the politicians to step up. We need to stop paying for borders and paying for infrastructure. We need to start supporting people instead of insisting that they're the enemy. Realise that they're just the same as me and you, and what they need is safety, and they need to be able to claim asylum from northern France, have their claims heard, come to the UK, and then do everything else that needs to be done. If it can be done for the Ukrainians and it can be done over a 2-week turnover, it can be done for everybody. And that's what we really need to focus on as well. I think I'm probably done. I don't know.
You do have a bit more time if you wanted to speak, but I'm sure we can go to questions.
No, it's fine. Well, then, to be honest, I think another thing that I find the word at the minute, it's very frustrating to be in Calais and literally the absolute opposite of how we treat people. So, for example, and it's not the same thing particularly, but my dad, who lives in France, and my mum have managed to sit there and they're sponsoring a family. They've got 4 people turned up yesterday, and it's fantastic. I am so super proud of them for doing this. But why was it just for the Ukrainians that it's made it simple? This morning, within 24 hours, they've managed to go to the Marys, get registered in school, have healthcare. It's fantastic. It's what we should all be doing. But we can all do this everywhere. And I just don't understand why we're not focusing on changing the rhetoric. The problem is it's all this right refugee, wrong refugee, and we're more than this. It's just human beings in need. And we absolutely have to make people understand that everyone has the right to be safe. Everyone has the right to sit there and do that from where they choose to do that from. There's not that many people that want to do that in the UK. Many thousands of refugees have gone all through Europe and are very happy to stay in Germany and in France and Holland as they can, as they should. We're not focusing enough, I think, on the fact that the media has a lot to do with this as well. So the rhetoric from the media, unless it's something dire, deaths in the sea, it's all quiet. They're not worthy of talking about. It's a case of this situation isn't really happening until something bad happens, and then everyone jumps on it, but then everyone goes away again, and still people are being left to make a decision between getting on a lorry or going on a boat. And both these options are inhumane and unnecessary. And we have to do more to make sure that no more people lose their lives. And I don't think it's taken on board, truthfully, the fact that it could be me or you. This could so easily. I mean, I live in France, so if a war broke out in France, I would have the right as an English person to come back to the UK and say, I want safety, I want to be with my family. So why is that so different for anybody else? I met a person who actually was from Sudan. He'd been in Ukraine for 5 years. The war came, he left, he came to Calais. And they basically, once they realised that he wasn't Ukrainian, kicked him out of all support systems. But he was no different to the people he travelled through with. But then his other passport dictated he was not entitled to support. This is inherently wrong. This isn't humanitarian. It's nothing about this says we're doing the right thing as human beings. And most people I've met are the most astute, kind, caring, wonderful people you could imagine. And they're also really young, 15, 16-year-old kids on their own, trying to make their way. I met a guy last week in Dunkirk. We were doing a distribution in Dunkirk last Friday. He's 15 years old with his 16-year-old friend, and they're in Dunkirk because they believe they have more chance getting a boat from there than they do from Calais. And I just look at my kids. I have a 17-year-old son, and I mean, I feel sick when he goes on his scooter. So the thought of him trying to go on a boat across that sea, and he does this every night, because we just can't hear his claim here. We just can't make him safe. We just can't sit there and open our borders to the degree we can let every human being have their right. They can't ask to claim asylum unless they're in the UK. This is fundamentally wrong. It's such a flawed system. And yet people are then treated as if they're illegal because they haven't entered into the right system. But there is no right system. So we go round and round and round. In the meantime, everyone is risking their lives, and it's unnecessary. I mean, yeah, I suppose at the end of the day, I think we all feel that frustration. I can't speak for everything that we do, because I'm so focused on just what I do in Calais that I don't have the capacity to understand what we're doing. I know that Claire and Care for Calais are just doing amazing things to make sure that they're taking people to court, that they're making people realize that what they're doing is wrong. I can't speak for that because I just don't have the knowledge. I just see literally the people that we see day to day in environments that are so hostile. We're not even discussing the CRS, the police, the situation, the sheer harassment. What used to be maybe once a week is now nearly every day that they have to move their tents, they have clearings, and then they have the full-on. It's just really hard to put into words when you see the same thing day in, day out. In 2015, I thought, we'll just get people through that winter. Everyone's going to realise there's so much media hype. Everyone's going to realise this is so wrong, that we can't treat people like this. We're just going to help them for this 1 year. And then the next thing you know, I'm thinking 7 winters in, and I see nothing. I see it getting far worse. I see less infrastructure, less support, less acknowledgement that what's happening in Calais could happen to all of us, less understanding that we really need support for people there right now. We can't sustain doing all these food packs on top of everything else, and it's going to get worse. We need help. They need help, and we need to make it so they haven't got to make these crossings across the sea, because Calais is the last resort. It shouldn't be an option. What they're doing right now should never be an option for not even just children. I mean, families. No one should have to face this and think this is the only way they can get to safety. There are better ways. It's being proven right now. There are better ways, a bit of infrastructure, a bit of understanding, and everyone could have the right to claim in northern France the ability to be safe and get here safely. And we shouldn't have to say, oh, I must have family members. Why? Why? I mean, apart from the fact that nearly everyone I've met has, why should they? I had no one living in France when I chose to live to France, well, I had the right to do it, so I did. Everyone has that right, and denying it is inhumane. I'm definitely done now.
No, thank you, Sarah. I mean, I can hear your passion, and I think everything you've said is so valid and so powerful. So thank you for speaking.
Thank you.
We're going to go to questions now. So just so you all know, we're going to stop the recording so that if anyone has any questions they want to ask, they feel comfortable doing so.